There is a shelf in Canada where American whiskey used to sit, and then one day, it simply did not. It was not because a shopper walked past it, or because someone decided they preferred something else. It was because the government of a province reached out and took it away. This is a story about Canada, about Donald Trump and the tariffs he put on the table, and about the moment when Canada's provincial liquor monopolies decided that the sharpest way to answer a trade fight was to strip every bottle of American wine and spirits from their shelves. Ontario's enormous liquor authority, one of the single largest buyers of alcohol anywhere in the world, pulled the American product completely, and most of the other provinces moved the same way within days. I want to walk you through exactly how that happened, why distillers in the United States felt it almost the instant it was announced, and what it quietly reveals about a kind of power that most of us never think about until the day it is turned against us. Let me set the scene the way I understand it, because the details matter here more than the noise. When the tariff dispute between the United States and Canada escalated, Canada did not respond only with the usual paperwork and counter-tariffs that governments trade back and forth. It responded with something you could actually see if you walked into a store. In Canada, alcohol is not sold the way it is in much of the United States. In a lot of provinces, the government itself is the buyer, the distributor, and often the retailer. There is a single public body that decides what gets stocked, what gets ordered from foreign suppliers, and what ends up on the shelf in front of a customer. And when that body decides it no longer wants a product, that product does not slowly lose market share. It disappears. That is the piece I want you to hold on to, because it changes everything about how this played out. The province that everyone watched first was Ontario, and for good reason. Ontario's liquor authority is not just big by Canadian standards, it is one of the most significant single alcohol purchasers on the entire planet. When an organization like that places an order, distilleries and wineries around the world pay attention, because that one account can represent a meaningful slice of a producer's annual sales. So when Ontario announced that it was removing American products across the board, this was not a symbolic gesture with a handful of bottles. This was one of the largest buyers in the global alcohol trade, switching off an entire category of supplier at once. And because Ontario moved, the pressure and the political logic spread. Most of the other provinces adopted the same posture, pulling American wine and spirits from their own government-run shelves as part of a broader push to answer the tariffs with something concrete. Now, here is where I want to slow down, because this is the part of the story that I think gets missed. We are all familiar with the idea of a boycott. A boycott, in the way most of us picture it, is a slow and messy thing. It depends on thousands or millions of individual people, each deciding, on their own, to stop buying something. Some of them do, some of them forget, some of them never hear about it in the first place. It is diffuse, it is uneven, and it takes a long time to add up to anything, if it adds up at all. A producer facing a consumer boycott can still fight for its place. It can run promotions, it can lower prices, it can win back shoppers one at a time. There is still a shelf to fight for. What happened in Canada was not that. This was not a million shoppers each making a private choice. This was a single government buyer making one decision and switching off an entire sales channel overnight. When a monopoly distributor delists you, there is no shelf left to fight for. You cannot lower your price to win the shopper back because the shopper never even gets the chance to see your bottle. The decision was made above their heads, at the level of procurement, by the entity that controls whether your product is in the building at all. And that is a completely different kind of pressure. A consumer boycott chips away at you. A delisting closes the door. One is 1,000 small refusals. The other is a single administrative signature that removes you from an entire market in one motion. That is why American distillers felt it so quickly. Think about what a delisting actually does to a producer. In the affected provinces, the government-run channel is not just one option among many. In many cases, it is the primary legal retail pipeline. It is the main road, and in some places, close to the only road by which a bottle legally reaches a customer. So when that channel closes to you, you are not losing a little bit of visibility, you are losing access to the market itself. Your product does not become harder to find, it becomes impossible to find through the normal, lawful route. And that loss is not gradual. It arrives the moment the decision is announced because the orders stop, the reorders stop, and the existing stock is pulled.
$1,000 of product sitting.
That product is just sitting here in Michter's warehouse with Canada-specific labels on these bottles in English and in French. They don't know what to do with this, and if nothing changes, they fear their losses will grow. The timing couldn't be worse for many American whiskey producers. One study showing the industry recently saw a nearly 2% drop in revenue. Amid the slowdown, the CEO of Jack Daniel's parent company called Canada's product.
For a producer that had built real business around Canadian sales, that is an immediate and very tangible hole. I want to be fair about the scale of who this touches, because it is easy to picture only the giant brands. Yes, the large American producers with recognizable labels were affected, and they have the resources to absorb a blow like this and wait it out. But the same mechanism hits smaller producers too, the wineries and the craft distilleries, for whom a single large foreign account can be a genuinely important part of the year. When your biggest export customer is a government body, and that government body decides overnight that it will no longer carry your category, you do not get a warning period to adjust. You get a notice, and then you get silence where the orders used to be. For a business operating on thin margins and careful planning, that kind of sudden absence is not an inconvenience. It is a real problem that lands on the books right away. This did not go unnoticed in Washington, and that is worth dwelling on because it tells you the move landed where it was aimed. The United States ambassador publicly described the alcohol bans as counterproductive. Now, think about what it means for a diplomat to comment directly on something like liquor sales. Ambassadors do not usually spend their public words on which bottles are stocked in a foreign store. When one does, it is a signal that the measure got attention at a level well
increased for Irish whiskies 14%, and that country's marketing team is trying to capitalize, increasing its focus on Canada.
Once people try a product, that's really what you want. It's people liquid to lips is what we're looking for. So sampling is so important, and getting people to realize that if they were really into a certain product and really into its flavor profile, that there are other great options available within the Irish whiskey category.
The local distillery owner says one initiative that got people trying more
above the retail floor. It means the pull was felt as more than a symbolic jab. It was registered as an actual pressure point, something that touched American producers and American interests enough that the response reached the diplomatic level. When your opponent's own representative calls your tactic counterproductive, that is often a quiet admission that the tactic was working on them, or at least that it stung enough to require a public answer. And that leads me to what I find genuinely striking about this whole episode, which is what it demonstrates about the tools a government actually has. We tend to think of trade retaliation as a narrow toolbox. Tariffs answered with tariffs, numbers answered with numbers. But Canada's provinces showed something else entirely. They showed that when a government controls the purchasing and the distribution of a product, it holds a lever that a normal open market simply does not have. It can wield its procurement power, its role as the buyer, as a weapon. It does not need to convince its citizens to change their habits. It does not need to run a campaign. It just needs to decide, at the level of the state buyer, that it will no longer order from a particular country. And in a system built around a public monopoly, that decision is enough. The market does not vote. The buyer decides. That is a model of retaliation that is fast, clean from the government's point of view, and almost impossible for the targeted producer to counter because there is no shopper to persuade back. I keep coming back to that contrast because it is the heart of why this story matters beyond the world of wine and spirits. In an ordinary market, power is distributed. It is spread across every shopper who walks through the door, and no single actor can shut a producer out entirely. But concentrate the buying into one public body, and you concentrate the power too. Suddenly, one entity can open or close a whole national market with a single administrative choice. Canada did not invent this by accident. The structure was already there, built over decades for reasons that had nothing to do with trade wars. But when the trade fight came, that structure turned out to be a ready-made instrument. The provinces did not have to build a new weapon. They already owned one, and they simply decided to use it. Not every province held the line indefinitely, and I want to be accurate about that, because the picture is not uniform. Some provinces later softened their stance. Saskatchewan and Alberta, for instance, eventually resumed sales of American products after their initial moves. So this was not a single permanent wall that went up everywhere and stayed up in exactly the same way. It was a wave, with some provinces going hard and staying there, and others pulling back after a period. That unevenness is itself part of the story, because it shows you the tension at the center of a tactic like this. A government has to decide how long it is willing to keep a market closed, and that decision carries its own costs, its own politics, and its own second thoughts. Closing the shelf is a statement. Keeping it closed, month after month, becomes a policy with consequences of its own. So the question that hangs over all of this is not really about the moment the bottles came off the shelf. That part already happened, and its impact already registered. The real question is about what comes next, and there are a few threads worth watching closely. The first is straightforward. If a broader deal is reached between the two governments, do the provinces quietly restore American products and let the shelves fill back up? Or do they keep the bans in place as leverage, as a card they are unwilling to give up until they are satisfied with the terms? Because once you have shown that you are willing to close the market, that willingness itself becomes a bargaining chip. The threat of keeping the door shut can be as useful at the negotiating table as the act of shutting it. A government that has proven it will pull your product has a credible way to keep pulling it. And that credibility is worth something in any negotiation. The second thread is subtler, and in some ways it is the more interesting one, because it does not depend on any government decision at all. There was, running alongside the official delistings, a broader mood among Canadian consumers, a preference to buy Canadian, to choose the domestic product over the imported one, especially the American one. And here is the thing about that kind of preference. It can start as politics, as a reaction to a specific dispute at a specific moment. But habits have a way of outliving the reasons that created them. If a shopper spends months reaching for a Canadian bottle because the American one is not there, and discovers in the process that they like the Canadian one just fine, then the politics can fade while the habit stays.
With profits already going down the drain.
It could be a country we're speaking with right now until all of a sudden you guys are going to get hit with tariffs next, and then that deal falls through. So it's a constant uncertainty.
Maggie Vespa, NBC News, Louisville, Kentucky.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
The dispute that started it can be resolved and forgotten, and the new buying pattern can simply continue because people got used to it. That is the quieter, longer-lasting risk for American producers. Not the ban itself, but what the ban trains people to do. And that brings me to the question that I think sits underneath this entire episode, the one that should make any producer, in any industry, pay attention. When a government pulls your product from the only shelf that truly matters, how long does it take before consumers simply forget that your brand ever existed? Because that is the real danger of being switched off at the channel level. It is not only the lost sales during the ban, it is that absence itself erodes memory. A brand lives in people's minds partly because they see it, because it is there, in front of them, week after week, a familiar label in a familiar spot. Take it away long enough, and something happens that is very hard to undo. People stop looking for it. They stop expecting it. They build new routines around its absence. And when the shelf finally reopens, if it reopens, the returning product is no longer the old familiar friend. It is a stranger asking for its place back, in a spot that someone else has already filled. That is what makes a delisting so much more dangerous than a bad sales quarter. A bad quarter is a number. You can recover from a number, but being erased from the shelf attacks something deeper. It attacks the presence of the brand in daily life, the simple fact of being seen. And presence, once lost, is not automatically restored just because the ban ends. The competitor who took your spot has had months to win the customer over. The customer has had months to stop thinking about you. You are not returning to your old position. You are starting a fight to be noticed again, and this time the ground is not neutral. It is already shifted against you. I think this is why the Canadian liquor story is worth more attention than it usually gets. On the surface, it looks like a small piece of a much larger tariff dispute, a footnote about wine and spirits inside a bigger argument between two governments.
This whole aisle is extra space that's been added for Canadian wines, most of them from Ontario. According to the LCBO, in the past year, sales of Ontario reds increased by more than 50%. For whites, it's more than 40%. Non-Canadian products are also benefiting. For wines, Australia, Chile, and Argentina are seeing the biggest boost, with Spanish, French, and Italian wine sales also up. Sales of Irish products also.
But look at the mechanism, and it becomes something more instructive. It is a clean, real-world demonstration of how a government can use its role as a buyer, its control over a distribution channel, as a form of leverage that hits harder and faster than the tools we usually talk about. It bypasses the slow uncertainty of a consumer boycott. It does not wait for public opinion to shift. It acts at the top of the pipeline and lets the effect cascade down. And by the time it reaches the shelf, the producer has already lost because there is no shelf left to defend. And it raises a broader point about how trade fights might look in the years ahead. If provinces in Canada can wield procurement and monopoly power this way, then the lesson is available to anyone with a similar structure. Any government that controls the buying of a category of goods holds a version of this same lever. The tariff is the tool everyone expects and everyone prepares for. But the quiet delisting, the administrative decision to simply stop buying, is a different kind of pressure. And it is one that targeted producers are far less equipped to fight, precisely because it takes the fight out of their hands. You cannot win back a customer who is never allowed to see you. That is the uncomfortable truth at the center of this story. So, as this continues to unfold, I will be watching those specific things. Whether the provinces that pulled American products restore them if the two sides reach an understanding, or hold the bans in reserve as leverage. Whether the ones that already resume sales, like Saskatchewan and Alberta, stay that course or reverse again if the dispute heats back up. Whether the diplomatic irritation, signaled by the ambassador calling the bans counterproductive, turns into anything more than words. And above all, whether the Buy Canadian instinct that grew up alongside the delistings outlives the politics that sparked it. Because that is the factor no government can simply switch back on. A shelf can be refilled by order, a habit cannot. Once people have moved on, they have moved on, and no announcement brings that back. There is something almost quietly ruthless about how effective this was, and I mean that as an observation about the mechanism, not a judgment about the politics. The genius of it, from the perspective of the side using it, is that it required almost nothing after the initial decision. No sustained campaign, no daily effort, no need to keep the public engaged. The government made one choice, the product came off the shelf, and then time did the rest of the work. Every week the American bottle was absent was another week the customer got used to its absence. The tactic did not need to be maintained, it only needed to be started and then left alone to do its quiet damage. That is a remarkably efficient form of pressure, and it is exactly why it should not be dismissed as a minor detail in a bigger story. For American producers, the lesson is a hard one, and it goes beyond this particular dispute. It is a reminder of how much of their business depends on structures they do not control, in markets where the rules of access are set by someone else. When you sell into a system where a government is the gatekeeper, your fate is not fully in your own hands. You can make the best product in the world, price it perfectly, market it brilliantly, and none of it protects you from a decision made at the level of the state buyer. In an open market, quality and value are a kind of defense. In a monopoly channel, they are not enough, because the decision to carry you or not carry you was never really about the shopper in the first place. It was about the buyer, and the buyer answers to politics, not to your marketing. That is the story as I understand it. A trade dispute sparked by tariffs, a set of Canadian provinces reaching for a tool most people did not know they had, and the result being American wine and spirits vanishing from government shelves, not one bottle at a time, but all at once, by decision. Ontario's massive liquor authority leading the way, most provinces following, a few later stepping back, and an American ambassador registering the sting in public. Underneath it all, a demonstration of how procurement power can be turned into a weapon, and a lingering question about whether a brand that gets erased from the only shelf that matters can ever really come back, or whether, by the time the door reopens, the customer has simply forgotten it was ever there.
Increased for Irish whiskies 14%, and that country's marketing team is trying to capitalize, increasing its focus on Canada.
Once people try a product, that's really what you want. It's people, liquid to lips is what we're looking for. So sampling is so important, and getting people to realize that if they were really into a certain product and really into its flavor profile, that there are other great options available within the Irish whiskey category.
The local distillery owner says one initiative that got people trying more.
That question does not have an answer yet, but the fact that it can even be asked tells you how much power sits in the hands of whoever controls the shelf. Thank you for watching this breakdown of Canada's liquor boards pulling American alcohol off their shelves and the pressure it put on United States distillers. If you found this useful and you want to keep following how this trade story develops, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you do not miss the next update as it happens. There is a lot still to watch here, and I would love to have you along for it.